For millennia, the monumental pyramids of Egypt stood defiant against the desert sands. Yet the civilization that erected them remained largely shrouded in mystery. The secrets of this great ancient culture, which once dominated the region, were finally threatened on July 19, 1799. During Napoleon Bonaparte's expedition in Egypt, a French soldier unearthed a large stone roughly 35 miles east of Alexandria. This artifact, the Rosetta Stone, would prove to be the critical link, unearthing a written language that had been silent for thousands of years. Its subsequent translation became the ultimate key to unlocking the vast history and hidden knowledge of an entire civilization. The Greek historian Herodotus famously proclaimed that Egypt is the gift of the Nile. This statement underscores the river's role as the nation's absolute lifeline, providing the essential water required for crop cultivation, the engine that powered the burgeoning civilization along the entire length of the Nile Valley. Geologically, the formation of the Nile Valley began during the Miocene epoch, carving the region into its distinctive, fertile shape and dividing the territory into two essential parts. The unique geography and resources provided an unparalleled environment for societal development. Crucially, the annual inundation cycles were foundational. These floods spread rich, fertile silt across the eastern and western banks. As the floodwaters receded and the river returned to its channels, the agricultural year began, establishing Egypt as one of the earliest large-scale agricultural communities in human history. As the Paleolithic era concluded, evidence shows widespread production of various tools, including arrows, harpoons, sewn skins, bone implements, and early pottery. The move toward settled life accelerated during the Neolithic period. Carbon-14 dating has shown that around 4600 to 4250 BCE, corn was being harvested and stored in a Neolithic silo near the Fayum oasis. The practice of co-regency, evidenced by double royal dates on official documents, ensured a stable transition of power. While the reign of Amenemhat I remains largely shrouded in mystery, his successor, Senusret I, is celebrated for fostering exceptional relationships with regional nomarchs and significantly bolstering the nation's economic vitality. It is noteworthy that under Senusret II, local officials, nomarchs, enjoyed substantial autonomy and prosperity, mirroring the political decentralization seen at the end of the Old Kingdom. Crucially, however, this newfound local strength did not precipitate the systemic collapse that had afflicted Egypt previously. Senusret III, 1878 to 1860 B.C.E., who followed a period of stability, is often regarded as the most formidable monarch of the era. His exceptionally prosperous rule led to the unprecedented honor of being deified during his own lifetime. His tenure was defined by aggressive military expansion into Nubia, coupled with a notable surge in Egypt's wealth and international influence. Senusret III perfectly embodied the Egyptian cultural ideal of military prowess and decisive action, the pinnacle of the warrior king. He was considered invincible when leading his armies. His extensive expeditions into Nubia not only widened Egypt's territorial reach but also resulted in the construction of border fortifications that significantly secured and facilitated lucrative trade routes. He also undertook a major military foray into Palestine, which subsequently strengthened commercial ties with that region. In the interest of controlling the Nile's vital resources, the ancient Egyptians utilized massive earth and stone constructions, weirs and dams, to manage floodwaters and direct irrigation. A prime example is the El Lahan Dam, commissioned by King Amenemhat III, who followed Senusret III in the 12th dynasty. Settlers gradually built more permanent structures, shacks and huts made of reeds and solid mud, and cultivated grain directly in the rich, muddy soil of the Nile marshes. Ancient Egypt was geographically and politically divided into two distinct territories: Upper and Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt was located in the north, where the Nile fanned out into numerous branches, creating the vast, marshy Nile Delta. Upper Egypt stretched southward, extending toward Aswan. Although the two kingdoms were unified by King Narmer or possibly Menes, around 3100 BCE, they symbolically retained their individual identities. Upper Egypt was represented by the Hedjet, the white crown, while Lower Egypt wore the Dishret, the red crown. Consequently, the pharaohs were perpetually known as the rulers of the two lands. symbolizing this dual sovereignty by wearing the skent, a double crown combining the white and red halves. The pre-dynastic period in ancient Egypt precedes documented history, spanning approximately 600 to 3150 BCE, from the late Paleolithic and Neolithic ages up to the foundation of the First Dynasty. Although written records are non-existent for this era, archaeological excavations have yielded countless artifacts that tell the cultural story of the Nile River Valley's inhabitants. Intriguingly, this period is often categorized and named based on the geographical regions or ancient city sites where the artifacts were discovered, rather than by the specific cultures themselves. Early development began with the Hailan culture, which thrived circa 30,000 BCE in the region between Egypt and Nubia. This culture eventually led to the emergence of subsequent groups, including the Caddan, Sibyllian, and Hurrian cultures, active around 10,000 BCE. All were primarily hunter-gatherer societies that, over time, adopted increasingly sedentary lifestyles, developing more permanent, agriculture-based settlements. This monumental project aimed to harness the annual floodwaters for the complex irrigation system while simultaneously shielding the state from destructive inundation levels. Preparation for the planting season typically commenced in early November, just before the floodwaters had completely receded from the basin fields. Farmers first ensured that all irrigation facilities were properly repaired and cleared, and meticulous surveys were carried out to reevaluate property boundaries before any planting began. Given the ancient Egyptians' renowned meticulousness in documenting every aspect of their daily existence, we possess detailed artistic representations, particularly in tomb paintings, depicting the processes of growing and harvesting grain. A wide variety of crops were cultivated, ensuring an abundant food supply, including emmer wheat, essential for bread and beer, grapes for wine, palm dates, doom palms, figs, sycamore, and papyrus. Papyrus, in particular, was invaluable. Its stems were processed into paper-like scrolls for writing and served as excellent material for crafting sails, cords, and mats. Farmers utilized specialized tools during the planting process, notably the ingenious shaduf. This hand-operated mechanism, designed to lift water from the river, consisted of a long pole counterbalanced by a weight on one end and a bucket suspended by a rope on the other. It was employed either to fill water jugs for transport or to efficiently distribute water into smaller canals along the ditches. Modern observers often marvel at how such an ancient civilization managed to construct massive edifices and transport colossal statues without relying on contemporary technology. Yet, scenes preserved in the tombs of high officials provide tangible evidence of these engineering feats. The Fayum Oasis, a natural basin located southeast of the Giza Plateau, hosted the Fayum A civilization between roughly 9,000 and 6,000 BCE. These early settlers thrived around a vast lake, relying on a mixed economy of agriculture, hunting, and fishing. Their ingenuity was apparent in their architecture. They built reed homes, often including subterranean basements for food storage. During this time, they domesticated cattle, sheep, and goats, while crafts like basketry and pottery production flourished. Socially, this era saw the rise of tribal chieftains, whose power may have been passed down hereditarily within family or tribal units. Communities evolved rapidly, transitioning from small, traveling groups into larger, permanent groupings of diverse tribes occupying the same territory. The Fayum culture eventually influenced the development of the Merimd culture, 5000 to 4000 BCE, named for the site on the western edge of the Nile Delta where its distinctive artifacts were discovered. Agriculture formed the undisputed foundation of the dynastic Egyptian economy, with the majority of inhabitants working as farmers who depended entirely on the predictable annual summer floods for their livelihoods. These earliest farmers, evolving from hunter-gatherers, cultivated staples such as wheat, barley, flax, lentils, and peas, alongside herding domesticated animals. Archaeological evidence, notably from the oldest layers of Merimd Beni Salama, 800 to 400 BCE, on the western Nile Delta, parallels findings at the Fayum Basin, solidifying their Neolithic origins. The Nile Valley's naturally convex terrain was crucial, encouraging the development of numerous basins. 130 have been identified, that annually collected floodwaters, bringing silt and mud to fertilize the soil. These basins effectively served as reservoirs for ancient Egypt's foundational irrigation systems. Food storage, primarily in clay jars or baskets buried in the earth, was vital. Jehuti-Hotep, a nomarch of the 12th dynasty who governed the 15th nome of Upper Egypt, features a particularly fascinating depiction in his tomb. The transportation of his own monument, measuring approximately 8 meters high. The scene shows 172 men pulling the statue on a slide using ropes, an immense effort significantly aided by the dumping of water in front of the sledge to reduce friction. Unfortunately, no archaeological trace of this specific colossus has ever been unearthed. Amenemhat III, while claiming no significant military victories, constructed nearly as many monuments as his powerful father. He is most recognized for commissioning the vast mortuary complex at Hawara, famously known by classical writers as the Labyrinth. Amenemhat IV, 1815 to 1807 B.C.E., succeeded him, faithfully continuing his father's policies. He completed Amenemhat III's pending construction projects and initiated many of his own. Throughout his reign, military and commercial expeditions were frequently dispatched, allowing trade to flourish, particularly with cities in the Levant, such as Byblos. The policy of co-regency, when successfully implemented, had typically ensured a seamless transfer of imperial authority. However, this stability faltered with Amenemhat IV, who died without a male successor prepared to take the throne. Following his death, power passed to his sister and likely wife, Sobenferu 1807 to 1802 BCE. Her reign is poorly documented, though she is considered the first woman to rule Egypt since the early dynastic period, unless the disputed Queen Nitocris of the 6th dynasty is accepted as historical. The 12th dynasty, a period often regarded as the most powerful and affluent of the Middle Kingdom, concluded upon Sobenferu's death, as she also left no heir. The 13th dynasty commenced with the reign of Sobkhotep I, 1802 to 1800 BCE. Building upon the achievements of earlier groups, the Elomari culture, thriving around 4000 BCE, showed greater architectural sophistication, constructing complex circular homes with plastered mud walls. Significantly, all these earlier cultures, Fayum, Merimd, and Elomari, evolved and flourished primarily in Lower Egypt, the northern region closest to the Mediterranean Sea. The civilizations of Upper Egypt developed later. In Upper Egypt, the inhabitants of the Badarian culture initially lived in movable tents, similar to their predecessors, but increasingly favored fixed homes. This was followed by the Amratian period, also known as Naqada I, which saw the construction of more elaborate homes featuring windows, hearths, wattle and daub walls, and windbreaks protecting the main entrances. It was also around 3500 BCE that the early practice of mummification began, always accompanied by essential burial items left with the deceased. These advancements continued through the Gurzian culture, Naqada II, lasting until around 3200 BCE. The Gurzians were notable for expanding trade with other regions, fostering significant changes in their art and culture. Their houses were built using sun-baked brick, and the wealthier residences included courtyards, an architectural feature that would become standard in later Egyptian homes. North of Naqada, the city of Abydos emerged as a critically important burial location, a sprawling necropolis, or city of the dead. The earliest massive tombs were constructed using mud bricks, though builders soon transitioned to using large blocks of neatly hewn limestone. Abydos was destined to become the preferred burial site for Egypt's eventual rulers, yet evidence shows that people from all parts of the nation brought their deceased here, providing rich burial gifts to honor their memory. Concurrently, while cities like Zois and Hierakonpolis were already ancient, major centers like Thinis, Naqada, and Nekhen were rapidly developing. While this new dynasty inherited the immense wealth and established policies of the preceding powerful era, they proved incapable of utilizing these assets effectively. The 13th dynasty monarchs generally maintained the structures and goals of their predecessors, successfully keeping the nation united, but they conspicuously lacked the personal charisma and centralized power enjoyed by the former kings. Based on fragmentary historical records, political groups began to organize and assert themselves in Lower Egypt. This era saw the 13th dynasty rulers make the critical decision to relocate the capital from Iti-Taui to Thebes, the former capital of the late 11th dynasty located in Upper Egypt, thereby inadvertently loosening their effective control over the northern territories. As background, Amenemhat I 1991 to 1962 BCE, at the dawn of the 12th dynasty, had established the small settlement of Hutweret, later Avaris, in the far north. This location swiftly developed into a thriving commercial hub, offering easy maritime access and key overland routes to Sinai and the Palestinian region. During the unstable 13th dynasty, robust trade and continuous immigration led to a massive influx of Semitic peoples settling in Avaris. These immigrants eventually grew rich and powerful enough to exert significant governmental authority over the nation. The Egyptians referred to these individuals as Haikaukasut, or rulers of foreign lands, which was later rendered by the Greeks as Hyksos. The precise origin of the Hyksos remains a subject of ongoing debate. While numerous hypotheses have been proposed, including the discredited idea that they were refugees fleeing the Aryan invasion of Asia, the matter is unresolved. The Egyptians generally labeled them Asians, but this term was a broad, nonspecific designation applied to virtually anyone residing beyond the country's eastern boundary, spanning from the Levant to Mesopotamia. Around 3400 to 3200 BCE, the hieroglyphic script was invented, primarily used for administrative record-keeping. The earliest forms of this writing, discovered at Abydos on pottery, clay seal impressions, and bone and ivory objects, usually consist only of labels or titles. Complete sentences would not appear until the reign of King Peribsen in the Second Dynasty, approximately 500 years later. This era culminated in the Naqada III period, 3200 to 3150 BCE, leading directly into the early dynastic period and Egypt's recorded history. Characterized by increasing commerce, communities expanded and populations grew throughout both Upper and Lower Egypt. Small clusters of brick dwellings rapidly evolved into larger urban centers. Competition over crucial resources, particularly water and trade goods, soon led to conflict. Thinis, Naqada, and Nekhen were the three dominant city-states in Upper Egypt during this time. Evidence suggests that Thinis defeated Naqada before subsequently absorbing Nekhen. These conflicts often involved the mysterious Scorpion Kings, whose exact identity remains uncertain, and other figures like Ka and Narmer. Some historians posit that Scorpion I, Scorpion II, and Ka were the final three rulers of the proto-dynastic period before King Narmer decisively conquered and unified Lower and Upper Egypt, establishing the foundational First Dynasty. The early dynastic period, spanning approximately 3150 to 2613 BCE, officially marks the beginning of Egypt's historical era. This time solidified the unification of the southern, upper, and northern, lower territories under a powerful, centralized authority. Crucially, the concept of the divine rule of the monarch took hold, and a distinct, sophisticated Egyptian culture began to emerge, characterized by advancements in writing, arts, and sciences. Menes, traditionally credited as the first king of unified Egypt, originated as a ruler of Upper Egypt, likely from Thinis or Hierakonpolis. As the 13th dynasty approached its end, the Egyptian monarchy ceased provisioning the fortifications located in Nubia and halted the stationing of new soldiers there. The troops who were already manning these forts were never recalled to Egypt, and these former garrisons became their permanent homes. Paradoxically, these isolated troops shifted their role, serving as critical trade intermediaries between the Egyptian city of Thebes and the burgeoning kingdom of Kush. The 13th dynasty's failure to manage affairs in the south, mirroring its neglect of the north, allowed the kingdom of Kush to consolidate into a powerful, centralized entity with its capital established at Kerma. At some point, several ancient Egyptian border fortifications were reportedly destroyed, possibly during an assault, although the specifics remain obscure. What is undeniable is that as the Egyptian government in Thebes continually disregarded Kush's growing influence in the south, Kush's power exponentially increased, leading to a dissolution of the rigid boundary lines. The abandoned Egyptian troops no longer viewed border protection as their primary duty. By this time, they had grown far more accustomed to the role of merchants than military personnel. The rulers documented for the latter phases of the 13th and 16th dynasties often possess non-Egyptian names or are demonstrably non-Egyptian, leading historians to identify them as Hyksos rulers. Their timeline is highly convoluted. Some names are only known from ceremonial objects, while others are mere fragments on king lists, rendering accurate chronological dating extremely challenging. The Hyksos first established economic supremacy throughout the eastern delta before expanding northward. They skillfully negotiated treaties and forged agreements with various nomarchs, governors of other lower Egyptian districts, eventually conquering a substantial territory and consolidating significant political authority. After consolidating power by defeating surrounding city-states, he conquered Lower Egypt around 3150 BCE. To solidify political ties between the regions, Narmer, often identified with Menes, married Princess Nithotep of Naqada. His reign was marked by military campaigns, both quelling revolts in Lower Egypt and expanding Egyptian territory into Canaan and Nubia. He was also a major patron of massive construction projects, spearheading significant urbanization. Horaha, Narmer's son, is assumed to have succeeded him around 3100 BCE, continuing his father's military expansion and prioritizing international trade. Horaha demonstrated a particular focus on religion and the afterlife, initiating the construction of the mastaba tomb structure. Horaha was succeeded by his son, Jur, around 3050 BCE, who followed closely in his predecessor's footsteps. Jur's son, Jet, circa 3000 BCE, married Princess Mernith. Following Jet's death, Mernith assumed the leadership of the nation. While historians debate whether she ruled as a full queen or as a regent for her young son, Den, her reign is historically crucial as the first recorded instance of a woman governing ancient Egypt. Den, circa 2990 BCE, is often considered the greatest monarch of the first dynasty, ruling for an impressive 50 years. His reputation for efficiency was built on significant economic advances, military conquests, and the stability necessary for funding expensive construction projects and elaborate artwork. Den was also the first monarch depicted wearing the unified crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt simultaneously, conclusively demonstrating his rule over a unified nation. Den was succeeded by Anajib and later Semerkhet, both of whom faced challenging reigns plagued by internal insurgency. The first dynasty finally ended with the reign of Qaa, during which his successors fiercely contested the throne. Once firmly established in avarice, the Hyksos demonstrated remarkable assimilation. They appointed Egyptians to high positions, adopted Egyptian customs and attire, and even integrated the worship of Egyptian deities into their own religious practices and ceremonies. The Hyksos monarchs formally inaugurated Egypt's 15th dynasty. Tragically, after they were eventually expelled, the victorious Theban invaders systematically destroyed almost all traces of the Hyksos presence in Egypt. Only a handful of Hyksos rulers are known by name, preserved primarily through scattered inscriptions and texts found at Avaris and elsewhere. The most prominent among them is Apipi, sometimes referred to as Apophis. Interestingly, his Egyptian name relates to Apep or Apophis, the giant snake deity who served as the eternal nemesis of the sun god. Concurrently with the rise of the Hyksos in northern Egypt, the Nubians were consolidating power in the south. The 13th dynasty, much like its counterpart in Lower Egypt, had fatally ignored its southern frontier. Thebes remained the capital of Upper Egypt, but it was now precariously situated, geographically wedged between the Hyksos dominating the north and the powerful Nubians controlling the south. The historian Manetho records an incident where the Hyksos ruler Apipi wrote to the Theban king Seqenenre, circa 1580 BCE, demanding, "Do away with the hippopotamus pool to the east of the city, for it prevents me from sleeping day and night." This message, likely a profound religious and political affront, probably referred to the Theban practice of hunting the hippopotamus, an animal sacred to the Hyksos god, Set. Seqenenre, perceiving the request not as a complaint but as a direct challenge to his sovereignty, immediately prepared to march on Avaris. These struggles were ultimately resolved by Hotep Sekemwi, who defeated the warring factions and established the Second Dynasty, 2890 to 2670 BCE. This period was defined by internal strife and instability, exacerbated by a scarcity of reliable records or pervasive misunderstandings of those that did exist. Consequently, historians lack precise dates for the Second Dynasty monarchs, and several kings' names appear to be repetitions of earlier rulers. The name Hotep-Sekemwe, meaning the two powerful ones are at peace, perfectly illustrates the historical ambiguity of the Second Dynasty. Based on the name alone, it suggests he took power after successfully subduing the princes who fought for the throne after Qaa. However, since his name is inscribed on the entrance to Qaa's tomb, it suggests he was the ruler responsible for burying Qaa and therefore already bore the name before the succession war even began. Regardless, Hotep-Sekemwe is credited with restoring peace to Egypt upon his ascension, albeit briefly, as instability and rebellion quickly returned during his reign. His successor, Ranab, or Nibra, was the first to symbolically link his name directly to that of the gods, establishing a divine bond between the monarch and the celestial realm. Peripson's decision to associate his name solely with the god Set remains historically contentious. Early scholars speculated he might have been the first monotheist, declaring Set the sole deity, but evidence of devotion to multiple gods during his reign quickly disproved this theory. Given that his name is found only in Upper Egypt, it is plausible that he chose to ally with Set for political expediency, distinguishing his southern rule from the dominant Horus cult of Lower Egypt. For whatever reason, he is remembered as a successful monarch, fostering a period where commerce, the economy, religious practice, and the arts all thrived. Seqenenre-Tau's mummy provides grim evidence that he was tragically slain in battle. This physical confirmation, coupled with subsequent events, strongly suggests that the Theban forces were defeated in this initial confrontation. Tau's son, Kamose, courageously took up the cause, bitterly lamenting in an inscription the humiliation of paying Asiatic taxes, and dealing with hostile outsiders both to the north and the south of his kingdom. Kamose then launched a massive offensive against the Hyksos. His personal account claims that his attack was so swift and terrifying that it rendered the Hyksos women barren, and that he raised avarice completely following the carnage. However, this narrative appears heavily exaggerated, as historical evidence indicates the Hyksos maintained control of Lower Egypt for 3 more years following Kamose's invasion, and avarice persisted as their principal stronghold. Kamose was succeeded by his brother, Ahmose I. Inscriptions credit Ahmose I with finally driving the Hyksos entirely out of Egypt and systematically destroying their metropolitan capital, Avaris. These historic events are vividly detailed in the tomb inscriptions of a soldier named Ahmose, son of Abana, who fought under King Ahmose I. The soldier recounts the utter devastation of Avaris and the subsequent retreat of the remaining Hyksos forces to Sharuhin in the Palestine region. Ahmose I then laid siege to Sharuhin for 6 grueling years until the Hyksos were ultimately forced to flee again, this time into Syria. Their fate after this final expulsion remains unknown. Ahmose I is celebrated not only for establishing the 18th dynasty but also for inaugurating the new Kingdom of Egypt, the era defined by the Egyptian Empire. The traumatic experience with the Hyksos directly necessitated the creation of a professional Egyptian army of conquest, as Ahmose I and his successors vowed to prevent any foreign power from ever gaining such dominance in their land again. Peripson was succeeded by Sekemwe, likely his son, who continued the construction projects and is credited with either fully restoring centralized control over Egypt's 2 regions, or at least strongly reinforcing the unification. His legacy includes notable statues at Hierakonpolis and Abydos, and, perhaps most importantly, his role as the father of Pharaoh Djoser. The Egyptian Third Dynasty begins with King Djoser, best known today for his monumental step pyramid at Saqqara. Historical timelines, such as Manethos, are vague regarding Djoser's predecessor, Sanecht, whose exact identity and reign length are unclear, known only through limited sources like the Abydos King List, the Turin Papyrus, and 2 reliefs discovered at Beit Kal. Djoser himself erected so many monuments that historians estimate his tenure must have lasted at least 20 years. He initiated military campaigns into Sinai and maintained the political unity of Egypt, generating the crucial stability necessary to fund his monumental construction projects and encourage flourishing arts. Djoser's step pyramid at Saqqara, recognized as Egypt's earliest pyramid structure, was conceived by his legendary architect and vizier, Imhotep. Imhotep served under Djoser as chief minister, sage, architect, and astrologer. A multi-talented figure who was later deified and worshipped as the god of medicine in both Egypt and Greece, where he was linked to the Greek deity Asclepius. He is credited with designing this revolutionary structure within the Saqqara necropolis near Memphis. The six-tiered pyramid stands as the world's oldest surviving monumental stone structure. Imhotep's immense prestige within Djoser's court is confirmed by an inscription on a statue of Djoser found near the pyramid site, which lists Imhotep's impressive titles, including leader of the sculptors and chief of the seers. The unparalleled prosperity and monumental success of the New Kingdom are, in fact, the profound legacy of the Second Intermediate Period. I was among the first rulers to fully grasp that the Hyksos had achieved their powerful position because prior Egyptian monarchs had allowed it through neglect. Consequently, I established protected zones along Egypt's sensitive boundaries and strategically fortified neglected settlements to safeguard the nation. His campaigns against the Hyksos brought him and his troops into direct contact with Palestine and Syria, where he continued military operations. Simultaneously, he conducted extensive military excursions southward against the emerging kingdom of Kush and Nubia. Upon his death, I left a stable political and economic situation for his replacement, Amenhotep I 1541 to 1520 BCE, having successfully defended and consolidated his hard-won authority. Inscriptions suggest that Amenhotep I faithfully adhered to his father's policies, modeling himself after the warrior monarch ideal, though evidence indicates he likely commanded battles only in Nubia. There are no detailed accounts of him launching expeditions into Palestine or Syria, but those regions remained secure throughout his and his successors' reigns. He was succeeded by Thutmose I 1520 to 1492 BCE, who immediately launched aggressive wars aimed at expanding Egypt's reach. He swiftly quelled a major revolt in Nubia that erupted shortly after his accession, personally murdering the Nubian monarch and suspending the corpse from the prow of his ship, a gruesome warning to future rebels. He then pushed Egypt's control further south into Nubia before turning his attention to conquering territories in Palestine and Syria. Domestically, he greatly expanded Thebes' renowned Temple of Karnak and oversaw the construction of numerous other temples and monumental structures across Egypt. Thutmose II, 1492 to 1479 BCE. Historical records from the Old Kingdom suggest that the pharaoh's court magician often doubled as the nation's chief physician. The step pyramid began simply as a traditional, flat-topped, sloping-sided mastaba tomb, similar to those of earlier dynasties. However, Imhotep envisioned a far grander eternal residence for his king. The finished pyramid was a series of 6 stacked mastabas, each successively smaller than the one below, forming the stepped profile. This structure marked a crucial technological shift, utilizing stone slabs, some carved with motifs of reeds and trees, instead of the customary clay bricks. Upon completion, the pyramid reached 62 meters, making it the tallest building of its era. In a bid to secure the king's body and treasures, the actual burial chambers were excavated far beneath the foundations, forming a maze of subterranean passageways and rooms. Despite this intricate defense, the strategy ultimately failed. The tomb was thoroughly looted of all valuables, including the king's body. In modern times, only Djoser's foot was found within the structure. Nonetheless, the step pyramid's genius and vision laid the groundwork for the construction achievements of the Third Dynasty, and crucially, established the architectural foundations for the later, true pyramids of the Fourth Dynasty that continue to mesmerize the world. The Old Kingdom of Egypt, encompassing the 4th through 6th dynasties, is universally known as the Age of the Pyramids or the Age of the Pyramid Builders. This title derives from the spectacular 4th Dynasty, during which King Snefru mastered the art of pyramid construction, leading directly to the erection of the Giza pyramids under the reigns of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. Historical documentation from this specific era is sparse. Succeeded him, but very little is known about his rule, as he was quickly eclipsed by his far more formidable half-sister, Hatshepsut. Thutmose II had one daughter with Hatshepsut, and a son, Thutmose III, by a minor wife, whom he designated as his official successor, 1458 to 1425 BCE. Following Thutmose II's demise, Hatshepsut 1479 to 1458 BCE was appointed regent of Egypt and eventually assumed the role of official co-ruler alongside the young Thutmose III. Having been the decisive power during her husband's tenure, she continued to govern as she saw fit after his death. Hatshepsut championed countless construction projects, successfully executed the most famous trading expedition to Punt, added substantially to the temple at Karnak, and maintained harmonious relations with Nubia to the south. Her construction projects were so numerous and aesthetically magnificent that subsequent pharaohs attempted to claim ownership of them. They were able to do so because her name was systematically removed from all of her structures, including her magnificent mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari, around 1458 BCE. The imposing obelisks erected in various temples served as potent symbols of the sun god. Today, many, whether original Egyptian artifacts or modern imitations, are displayed across the globe. The process of carving these monolithic structures is well understood, evidenced by the presence of an unfinished obelisk still located in the granite quarries of Aswan. Hatshepsut commissioned this specific construction, likely intended to accompany what became known as the Lateran obelisk, which was originally situated at Karnak before eventually being transported to the Lateran Palace in Rome. Thutmose III, 1458 BCE, inherited a country that was both wealthy and securely defended, and he wasted no time in enhancing its standing. He is recognized as the pharaoh who truly established the Egyptian empire, which his descendants would successfully sustain. Consequently, historians often characterize the history of the Old Kingdom as being literally written in stone, relying heavily on architectural evidence, statues, and their accompanying inscriptions to reconstruct the past. Supplementary carvings and stele discovered elsewhere document various events and their dates. A key source for understanding the era's worldview came later. The Mausoleum of Unas, the last monarch of the 5th dynasty, contained the first known pyramid texts, detailed writings and drawings inside the tomb that profoundly illuminate the religious beliefs of the period. During the Old Kingdom, the elite established a standardized art style, ensuring that figures and sculptures were produced uniformly to reflect the aesthetic preferences of the capital, Memphis. While other art forms, such as painting and literature, exhibited increasing sophistication, the monumental works remain the most famous. The pyramids of Giza and the Great Sphinx, both of which endure today. Later generations of Egyptians consistently placed immense value on the art and architecture of this golden age. While religious systems were ostensibly shared across all social strata, profound social inequality persisted, extending even into the concept of death. The only real impediment to achieving the afterlife was burial outside of Egypt. Egyptians deeply believed that rebirth required interment on native soil. Consequently, if someone died abroad, relatives undertook enormous efforts to repatriate the body for the proper mortuary rituals, ensuring their entry into the afterlife. Coordinating the vast labor force required to construct the Giza pyramids and other major projects demanded an unprecedented level of bureaucratic efficiency, which, in turn, necessitated a powerful central authority. At the apex of this social structure stood the monarch, who theoretically held divine ownership over all of Egypt. Utilizing the war chariot adopted from the Hyksos, sophisticated bronze weaponry, and superior military strategies, he defeated neighboring countries and expanded Egypt's dominion further than it had ever stretched before. Over a period exceeding 20 years, he personally commanded at least 17 distinct military campaigns, successfully subduing kingdoms from Libya to Syria and extending Egyptian authority in the south from the region around Buhan down to Kirki or Karai. Once Hatshepsut died and Thutmose III fully assumed the throne, the king of the Syrian city of Kadesh, believing the new pharaoh to be weak and inexperienced, incited a massive revolt in the Egyptian province of Canaan. This rebellion rapidly garnered support from other local powers, aiming to permanently overthrow Egyptian control. The resulting coalition army convened in the city of Megiddo. Thutmose III marched his army from Thebes to Megiddo in northern Canaan, making the bold, strategic choice of taking a narrow, difficult path through the town of Aruna instead of the wider, easier routes. This maneuver allowed him to surprise his enemies by emerging into the Jezreel Valley behind their defensive positions, successfully driving them from the field in the ensuing rout. Thutmose III was then required to lay siege to the city to capture it fully. Janini, Thutmose III's trusted commander and military scribe, naturally accompanied his monarch to document the campaign and suppress the rebellion. His written record describing the fight profoundly impressed Thutmose III, who subsequently ordered sections of Chinini's account to be inscribed onto the walls of the great temple of Ammonius at Karnak, and to a lesser extent in other locations. Chinini's text commences by explaining the very existence of the writings on the temple walls, before proceeding to detail the motivations and objectives of the campaign itself. Egyptian society was fundamentally divided into the literate and illiterate classes. The small literate fraction constituted the ruling aristocracy. They dictated the character of the civilization and formed the foundation for nearly all documented knowledge we possess today. Often, the individual status of these high-ranking officials superseded the positions they held. Thus, while the king defined the limits of bureaucratic power, effective governance rested entirely on this limited pool of aristocratic literates. Since the king could not personally oversee every aspect of society, the essential role of the vizier was established as early as the early dynastic period. The vizier, acting as a chief minister or prime minister, delegated court responsibilities, managed communications via scribes, and oversaw critical state functions including military operations, regional governors, public works projects, and tax collection. Although Huni, the last king of the Third Dynasty, was once thought to have initiated the massive building projects of the Old Kingdom by commissioning the Mytham Pyramid, credit for this work now belongs to Snefru, the founding king of the Fourth Dynasty, and likely Huni's son by a lesser queen. Snefru inaugurated the Old Kingdom's golden age of architecture, with his most significant achievements being the two colossal pyramids built for him at Dashur. His building efforts began at Mytham with a structure now often called the False Pyramid, due to its ruined shape. It resembles a tower rising from a massive gravel mound. The Mytham Pyramid was intended to be Egypt's first geometrically true pyramid, but it failed catastrophically. The flaw lay in engineering changes applied to Imhotep's original step design. The exterior casing was built upon sand rather than solid rock, leading to the structure's eventual collapse. Snefru's next attempts were the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid at Dashur. The wretched adversary, a phrase referenced frequently throughout the inscriptions, primarily refers to the king of Kadesh, who had instigated the revolt and gathered the armies against Egypt, though the term is occasionally used to denote anyone who joined the rebellion. Following the decisive Battle of Megiddo, Thutmose III systematically subdued and punished all participating parties, capturing not only Kadesh but also all of Syria and expanding Egypt's reach into the Mitanni territories in Mesopotamia. Thutmose III was succeeded by his son, Amenhotep II, 1425 to 1400 B.C.E., who inherited and built upon his father's powerful and secure empire. While he was not characterized as a warrior king like his father, he did commission numerous construction projects and successfully negotiated peace and commercial deals with other nations, notably the Mitanni. Thutmose IV, 1400 to 1390 B.C.E. His replacement continued these diplomatic and construction programs, allegedly based on interpretations of his famous dream stele, which recounts the story of how he gained the kingdom. Although the legal son of Amenhotep II, Thutmose IV is sometimes regarded as a usurper. He is perhaps best remembered as the king responsible for restoring the Great Sphinx and surrounding structures at Giza. Thutmose IV was succeeded by Amenhotep III, 1386 to 1353 B.C.E., who is widely considered one of Egypt's most effective and powerful rulers. Amenhotep III governed Egypt during the very peak of its artistic, political, and financial strength. His reign was characterized by unprecedented opulence. He frequently leveraged his immense wealth to influence other nations and secure diplomatic outcomes. He ensured the stability of the nation, maintained its expanded boundaries, and dedicated himself heavily to the arts and construction initiatives, with many of Egypt's most impressive surviving structures dating from his tenure. The Bent Pyramid earned its name because it dramatically shifts angle partway up the structure. It initially rises at a steep 55-degree incline before abruptly changing to a shallower 43-degree angle, giving the impression that the sides bend toward the apex. This mid-construction correction was necessary because the builders realized, after completing the base, that the 55-degree angle was structurally too steep to support the weight, forcing them to quickly modify the plan to safely finish the project. Snefru, seemingly unfazed by architectural setbacks and financial loss, simply moved on when the bent pyramid failed to meet his standards, starting again. The Red Pyramid, named for the reddish limestone used in its core construction, was built upon a firm, stable foundation and maintained the successful 43-degree inclination. Standing 105 meters tall, the Red Pyramid became Egypt's first successfully executed true pyramid. Although now exposing its reddish core, it was originally encased in brilliant white limestone, a finish that, like on later pyramids, was eventually stripped away over millennia by locals for use in other building projects. Emulating Djoser's complex at Saqqara, Snefru ensured that mortuary temples and subsidiary structures were erected around his pyramids, maintained and overseen by dedicated priestly staffs. Day-to-day activities once the Red Pyramid was finished. This legacy of stability was then passed to his son, Khufu, known to the ancient Greek authors as Cheops, upon Snefru's death. Khufu is universally recognized for commissioning the Great Pyramid of Giza. However, the Greek tradition portrayed him as a harsh tyrant who enslaved the populace and forced them into labor against their will. This negative image may stem from narratives found in the Westcar Papyrus, a collection of 4 tales discovered by Henry Westcar around 1824 CE, concerning the kings of the 4th dynasty. However, during his reign, the priesthood of the god Ammonius began accumulating vast fortunes. They acquired more property than the monarch himself and used this immense power base to further enrich their order. Amenhotep III attempted to curb their escalating influence by aligning himself with Aten, a relatively minor deity symbolized by the sun disk. He seemingly believed that throwing the authority of the pharaoh behind the Aten cult would elevate its priests, thus diminishing the status of Ammonius' powerful clergy. While his scheme failed to completely contain the Ammonius priests, it successfully elevated the deity Aten, who would go on to play a critically important role during the rule of Amenhotep III's son and successor. Amenhotep IV, later known as Akhenaten, was the Egyptian pharaoh renowned for abruptly imposing monotheism and outlawing the ancient gods. His rule marks the beginning of the Amarna period, named after the location where the capital was drastically moved from Thebes to modern-day Amarna, Akhetaten. He ascended as Amenhotep IV but dramatically changed his name to Akhenaten in the 4th or 5th year of his reign. He dissolved the traditional religion, particularly the powerful worship of Ammonius, and elevated the deity Aten to the status of the one true universal god. Only the cult of Aten was recognized as a valid religious organization. All other sanctuaries were shuttered and their veneration forbidden. He even constructed a massive shrine dedicated to Aten within the great temple of Ammonius at Karnak, which he simultaneously closed down. His wife was the celebrated Nefertiti, best known today for the magnificent sculptural bust created by the artist Thutmose. Upon Akhenaten's death, he was succeeded by his young son, Tutankhaten 1336–1327 BCE, who quickly altered his name to Tutankhamun. One particularly notable tale, recounted by Khufu's sons, describes the king summoning a sorcerer who claimed he could reattach a severed head. Some modern academics interpret Khufu's demand for a demonstration as either maliciously cruel or profoundly careless. Nonetheless, Khufu's reign saw Egypt's wealth significantly boosted, thanks to successful military campaigns against Nubia and Libya and lucrative trade agreements, such as those with Byblos. He also prioritized internal investments, notably agricultural innovations designed to improve the quality of life for his subjects. This era saw the construction of the world's first documented dam in Wadi al-Jarawi, a mountainous area west of modern Helwan. This massive project greatly enhanced water availability for local farms and communities. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as the last remaining of the ancient 7 wonders of the world and remains the definitive symbol of Egypt. Located on the Giza Plateau near modern Cairo, its construction spanned approximately 20 years during Khufu's rule. While its exact purpose is still debated, the most accepted theory is that it served as the king's monumental tomb. Exactly how this structure was erected remains one of history's great engineering mysteries. Historians continue to debate theories, such as the use of external ramps wrapped around the structure to move blocks into place. These speculative theories persist despite increasing evidence suggesting the ancient Egyptians utilized advanced technical means, methods likely so common to them that they saw no need to formally record them. The complexity of the internal passages, shafts, and burial chambers, alongside the nearby Osiris shaft, fuels the popularity of these fringe theories, compounded by the sheer mystery of the building process and its precise alignment with the cardinal points. Taking the throne at just 9 years old, the young ruler immediately relocated the capital to Memphis, restored Thebes as the primary religious center, a move that also carried significant political weight, reopened the closed temples, and fully reinstated Egypt's ancient polytheistic religion. Although he instituted significant administrative changes that helped stabilize the nation, Tutankhamun is universally renowned for his magnificent, largely intact tomb, famously discovered by Howard Carter in 1922. Tutankhamun was married to his half-sister, Ankhesenamun, until his premature death around the age of 18. Following his demise, Ankhesenamun may have briefly married the vizier I, possibly 1324 to 1320 BCE, whom some experts believe succeeded Tutankhamun, or she may have attempted to govern Egypt independently. Regardless of I's exact role in the succession, Ankhesenamun vanished soon after Tutankhamun's death. The general Horemheb then seized control, dedicating his rule to emphatically restoring Egypt to its traditional grandeur. Horemheb 1320 to 1295 BCE undertook extraordinary measures to erase the Amarna period rulers from Egyptian memory, systematically burning all of Akhenaten's statues and writings, including the complete demolition of his sanctuary at Karnak. Horemheb fiercely defended traditional Egyptian religion and customs, which had suffered due to Akhenaten's neglect of international relations and domestic infrastructure. While Horemheb successfully returned Egypt to a state of stability and former glory, he was ultimately unable to elevate the nation back to the absolute peak of prosperity achieved under Amenhotep III. Upon Horemheb's death without an heir, his vizier, Paramesu, ascended the throne as Ramesses I, establishing the illustrious 19th dynasty. Already an elderly man, Ramesses I quickly appointed his son, Seti I, as his successor. Himiunu, a prominent relative and vizier during Khufu's 4th dynasty reign, supervised the planning and construction of the Great Pyramid and was buried near the king's own monument. The actual construction work relied on both skilled experts and unskilled laborers employed by the state. These workers were compensated for their time, volunteered for community service, or worked to settle debts. The annual flooding of the Nile River was crucial for Egyptian civilization, depositing rich, fertile soil across the farmlands. However, this inundation also halted agricultural activities during the flood season. It was during these periods that the government provided work for farmers by initiating large-scale public monument projects. These workers performed the demanding physical labor, moving stones, raising obelisks, and constructing the temples and pyramids that still inspire awe today. Crucially, this labor was always compensated. No literary or physical evidence supports the assertion that Egypt's major monuments were built by slave labor. Constructing monuments like the pyramids and their associated complexes offered the peasantry their only opportunity for social advancement. Skilled laborers, such as specialized painters and engravers, were highly sought after and paid more than the unskilled workers responsible for merely hauling the construction stones. Farmers could also improve their standing by learning crafts, producing the necessary ceramics, vases, bowls, plates. Carpenters who created essential furniture, tables, beds, storage chests, could also prosper, as could the painters needed to decorate the elite dwellings, tombs, and temples. Brewers were also highly respected, and breweries, sometimes managed by women, appear to have frequently been female-operated in early Egyptian history. Beer was the staple beverage in ancient Egypt and often served as a form of payment. Workers on the Giza Plateau, for instance, received a beer ration 3 times daily. Ramesses I took up Horemheb's mission to restore Egypt's sacred sites and shrines, contributing notably to the immense temple of Ammonius at Karnak. He granted Seti I the command of military campaigns aimed at reclaiming territories lost during the chaotic reign of Akhenaten. Following Ramesses I's death, Seti I assumed the kingship, continuing the nation's revival. He made significant additions to the Grand Karnak project while actively preparing his own son, Ramesses II, for future dominance. Ramesses II, 1279 to 1213 BCE, would become the most celebrated pharaoh in Egyptian history. Ruling for an extraordinary 67 years, the magnificent temples and enduring monuments he commissioned, testaments to his wealth, conquests, and achievements, still awe visitors today. Ramesses II's name is inscribed at virtually every major ancient Egyptian site. While his purported triumph at the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE is legendary, his greatest political accomplishment was not an act of war, but of diplomacy. The negotiation of the world's first recorded peace treaty. The Hittites of Anatolia had steadily grown in power since the 2nd millennium BCE, eclipsing Babylonia by 1530 BCE and seriously challenging Egypt's dominance. Even during the 18th dynasty, the Hittites had sent communications to Pharaoh Akhenaten, but he remained preoccupied with religious reforms and ignored the rising threat along his frontiers. Horemheb later campaigned against the Hittites but failed to secure a lasting victory. By the time of Tutankhamun, Akhenaten's successor, the Hittites had grown powerful enough to establish garrisons dangerously close to Egyptian territory. When Horemheb finally took the throne in 1320 BCE, he launched aggressive campaigns to stabilize Egypt's borders. Seti I achieved notable success, temporarily reclaiming Palestine and Kadesh. However, satisfied with his immediate victory, Seti I neglected to fortify Kadesh for future defense. The deity Osiris was credited with providing the drink, and the goddess Ten oversaw the breweries. Marriages were generally secular rather than religious affairs, with parents arranging most unions across all social classes. Girls typically married around age 12 and boys around age 15. Royal children were often pledged to foreign monarchs in infancy to secure political treaties. But the lives of the ancient Egyptians were not solely defined by labor. They found ample time for leisure, enjoying sports, board games, and other activities, including hockey, handball, archery, swimming, tug-of-war, gymnastics, rowing, and water jousting. A mock sea battle performed in small boats on the Nile where one juicer attempted to knock another out while a teammate steered the craft. Ancient Egyptian festivals were unique based on the occasion but consistently revolved around drinking and feasting. The typical diet mainly consisted of grains, wheat, and vegetables. Meat was extremely expensive and usually only afforded by the royalty. Khufu was succeeded by Jedefra, a family member who lay outside the traditional legal line and did not appear to be the designated heir. Scholars disagree on whether Jedefra or his brother and successor, Khafre, was responsible for building the Great Sphinx of Giza. The Sphinx, the world's largest monolithic monument, depicts a recumbent lion's body merged with a king's head. Although this visage has historically been identified as Khafre, recent arguments, notably by Dobrev, suggest it might be Khufu. However, its exact alignment with Khafre's pyramid complex, and the face's closer resemblance to Khafre than Khufu, strongly supports Khafre as the builder. Khafre's pyramid is the second largest at Giza, and his funerary complex nearly matches the grandeur of his father's. Facing the entrenched Hittite threat, Ramesses II gathered his forces at Pi-Ramesse in 1274 BCE, aiming to dislodge the Hittites from Kadesh and dismantle their army. Leading his 20,000 soldiers organized into 4 divisions, Ramesses II rode ahead in his chariot. His first division advanced so rapidly that it soon outpaced the other 3. Near Kadesh, 2 Bedouin scouts were apprehended. When questioned about Muwatalli II and the Hittite army, they claimed the army was far away and that Muwatalli II feared the young Egyptian king. In reality, these men were spies. Muwatalli II had already fortified Kadesh with an immense force, 3,500 chariots and 37,000 troops, hidden just beyond the next hill. Although later accounts suggest Ramesses II captured more spies who revealed the horrific truth, the intelligence arrived too late. Ramesses II, in his haste, had isolated his leading division. As the Hittite chariots crashed into his unsuspecting camp, he frantically sent messages to the 3 trailing divisions. The Ta division arrived just in time to prevent total rout. Ramesses II personally led the remaining Ammonius division into the thick of the fighting repeatedly, driving the Hittite soldiers back toward the Orontes River, where many drowned. Mu'adali II merely needed to march out from Kadesh's walls to trap Ramesses II between the river and his advancing reserve, yet for unknown reasons, he held back and never committed his full force. Ramesses II immediately declared a magnificent triumph at Kadesh, commissioning scribes to immortalize his heroic narrative of the victory. Mu'adali II's version, predictably, differed sharply, claiming Kadesh as a Hittite success. In truth, Ramesses II failed to capture the city, but he did manage to break the Hittite army in the field. Conversely, while Mu'adali II retained Kadesh, he failed in his goal of annihilating the Egyptian army. Little documentary evidence remains regarding his reign, but Egyptian texts indicate he continued his father's policies by centralizing power among close family and maintaining strict control over law and policy. Following Khafar's death, succession was briefly destabilized when Baka, Jadefer's son, took the throne but ruled for less than a year before Khafar's son, Menkaure, took over as monarch. Both Greek and Egyptian sources praise Menkaure. Following the tradition of his father and grandfather, Menkaure initiated the construction of his own pyramid and shrine complex at Giza. Noticeably smaller than the preceding two, Menkaure's complex represents a crucial turning point in the Old Kingdom's history and foreshadows its eventual collapse. During his era, the immense resources previously available for constructing the Great Pyramid were no longer accessible. Despite this, he strove to build an everlasting residence comparable to those of his predecessors. During the construction, Menkaure's designated heir, Quenra, died, disrupting the dynastic line. Menkaure himself died before the complex was finished, having reigned for 30 years, a failure that many historians attribute to the diminished resources at his disposal. Shepsgaf, Menkaure's successor, completed the structure at Giza but opted for a relatively modest mastaba burial at Saqqara. As observed, the monarchs diverted vast resources to their funerary structures and associated buildings. However, these temples and sanctuaries increasingly fell under the authority of the priests who managed them, shifting control away from the king. Although the Giza Plateau is today a sandy, ancient site on the outskirts of modern Cairo, in Menkaure's time, it was a thriving city of the dead, populated by the living who maintained it. Giza contained priests' houses, shrines, worker accommodations, stores, factories, breweries, and all the amenities of a small, active metropolis. Merneptah, Ramesses II's 12th son, was never intended to be pharaoh, succeeding only because his 11 older brothers perished during their father's incredibly long reign. Merneptah quickly established his own reputation as a warrior king, defeating the Libyans and repelling an invasion by the Sea Peoples. His campaign records are immortalized on the famous Merneptah stele, which holds the earliest known reference to the Israelites as a distinct tribal group. Entering the 20th dynasty, Ramesses III marked the new kingdom's last significant strong ruler. Since Horemheb had revitalized the ancient state religion, the authority of the priests of Ammonius had grown ceaselessly, siphoning wealth and influence away from the crown. Conditions worsened during the entire Ramesside era of the 20th dynasty, exacerbated by the increasing threat posed by the mysterious Sea Peoples, forcing Ramesses III to wage defensive wars against them. Their origins remain obscure as all extant records come exclusively from Egyptian sources, which typically describe them only in terms of conflict. For example, the Tanis stele, which notes, "They came from the sea in their warships and none could stand against them." This enigmatic nature characterizes the Egyptian accounts of these invaders. Ramesses II, Merneptah, and Ramesses III were the three great pharaohs who documented their struggles and purported victories against the Sea Peoples, providing the most comprehensive documentation available on these groups. During the reign of Ramesses III, the Sea Peoples launched a full-scale invasion, having already destroyed the crucial Egyptian commerce outpost at Kadesh, in Syria. They initiated their campaign with rapid coastal raids before advancing toward the Nile Delta. Although Ramesses III momentarily subdued them in 1180 BCE, they soon returned in overwhelming numbers. The civilian life of ancient Egypt was highly structured. The lowest social class consisted of peasant farmers who did not own the land they worked or the homes they lived in. The land belonged to the monarch, court members, nomarchs, and priests. Peasants began their day with the sentiment, "Let us work for the nobility." Regardless of any other trade they might practice, peasants were predominantly farmers. They cultivated and harvested their crops, giving the majority to the landowner and keeping a portion for themselves. Most families maintained private gardens, usually tended by the women while the men worked the communal fields. This lowest societal stratum produced the goods essential for commerce, ensuring the survival of the civilization as a whole. These peasants constituted the workforce that erected Egypt's monuments. When the Nile flooded, rendering farming impossible, men and women shifted to the king's public works projects. This labor was always justly rewarded, and no historical evidence supports the notion that slavery built Egypt's monumental structures. Building monuments like the pyramids and associated burial complexes, temples and obelisks provided the peasantry with their sole possibility of upward mobility. The fourth dynasty concluded with Shepseskaf's brief tenure, and the fifth began with perceptibly less grandeur. The fifth dynasty is often called the Sun King's dynasty, because royal titles frequently incorporated the name of the deity Ra-Re. The first three rulers of this dynasty, Userkaf, Sahur, and Neferuker-Kakai, would later be mythologized as divinely chosen in the Westcar papyrus tale, The Birth of the Kings. The dynasty officially began with King Userkaf, though a queen named Khentkhoz-I, potentially a daughter of Menkaure, holds a prominent place in Egyptian texts as the mother of two kings of Upper and Lower Egypt. Learning from the costly conventional battles of his predecessors, Ramesses III chose not to meet them in a traditional field engagement. Instead, he devised a defensive plan using guerrilla warfare. He established ambushes along the coast and the delta, strategically hiding archers along the beaches. At his signal, these concealed forces unleashed volleys of arrows onto the approaching ships. Once the enemy crew was killed or struggling in the water, fire arrows completed the destruction of the vessels. Having crushed the naval threat, Ramesses III focused on the remnants of the land forces, employing similar tactics. In 1178 BCE, the Sea Peoples were decisively routed off the coast near Jahi, or Zois. Egyptian records again depicted a spectacular victory. Many invaders were slaughtered, while others were captured and conscripted into the Egyptian army and navy, or sold into slavery. Despite saving Egypt from complete collapse, the war proved devastatingly expensive. The royal treasury was so depleted that the tomb builders at Deir el-Medina could not be paid, sparking the first recorded labor strike in history, as workers refused to return until they were compensated. From this point, the strength and momentum of the Egyptian empire began to dissipate. Although Ramesses III maintained a strong central government, secured the borders, and fostered temporary prosperity, the kingdom was collapsing from within. The pharaoh's sacred role diminished because the powerful priests of Ammonius increasingly positioned themselves as the necessary intermediaries between the gods and the people. Ramesses III himself died following injuries sustained in an assassination attempt orchestrated by one of his lesser wives. Ramesses IV, 1155 to 1149 BCE, ascended only after his older brothers died. He attempted to emulate the great rulers of the past, completing construction projects while fighting to maintain the crumbling empire. However, he died after a short reign. Although the identity of these monarchs is unclear, her monument is the fourth large pyramid at Giza, signifying her importance. Userkaf is most famous for initiating the Temple of the Sun at Abu Sir. This structure represents a significant theological shift away from the absolute divine status the monarch held at the beginning of the Fourth Dynasty, and marked the decline of Giza as the primary royal necropolis. The sun god Ra was now venerated directly by the populace through the priesthood, thereby diminishing the king's exclusive role as the god's chief representative on earth. Userkaf's son, Sahur, succeeded him and built his funerary complex at Abu Sir, situated near the Sun Temple. Sahur was an effective ruler who led the first documented Egyptian expedition to the land of Punt and established valuable trade treaties with foreign nations. Punt, in particular, became a crucial source for many of Egypt's most precious resources and was eventually revered as a legendary land of the gods. Sahur also constructed his own sun temple at Abu Sir and was the first to use palm-shaped columns in architecture, a feature that would become standard across Egypt. His military successes and careful management of resources enriched the nation, evidenced by the intricate workmanship and detailed inscriptions found within his mortuary complex. His son, Neferkar-Kakai, followed him. Inscriptions suggest he was well regarded and a good king, but little is known of his tenure beyond the fact that the priesthood's influence grew even stronger under his rule. His son, Neferfra, succeeded him but died young, possibly around the age of 20. He was followed by King Shepseskare. Nusser-Ini succeeded him, and under his rule, the priests of Ra gained even greater authority. The bureaucracy dedicated to maintaining the temples and mortuary buildings expanded, placing a heavy financial burden on the royal treasury responsible for sanctuary care and upkeep. He was succeeded by Ramesses V, who struggled to exert control over the ambitious priests of Ammonius, and Ramesses VI, who carried on the unsuccessful fight. The lineage continued through Ramesses IX, Ramesses X, and Ramesses XI. All of these later pharaohs struggled against foreign incursions and the relentless internal conflicts with the priesthood of Ammonius. One obscure incident tied to these struggles involved the high priest of Ammonius, Amenhotep, who was deposed by the vizier Penihasse and forced to flee south to Nubia. What is certain is that the priests of Ammonius accrued immense power, eventually claiming the throne and ruling parts of the country. Smendes, 1077 to 1051 BCE, a ruler in Lower Egypt based in Tanis, buried Ramesses XI. According to Egyptian tradition, the successor buried the previous monarch. Smendes asserted his legitimate claim to rule by moving the capital from Pyramus to Tanis. By this time, however, the priests of Thebes had grown sufficiently powerful to claim ruling authority. Consequently, the nation fractured, dividing into a northern kingdom governed by Tanis, Lower Egypt, and a southern priestly state ruled from Thebes, Upper Egypt. Notably, this split did not result in widespread civil conflict. While Smendes was a prominent figure, his authority barely extended beyond Lower Egypt. He ruled concurrently with Thebes' powerful high priest, Herihor, circa 1080 to 1074 BCE, who, like all Ammonius high priests, was also the general of the armies but wielded little power outside of Thebes itself. This state of fragmentation defined the third intermediate period. Regional nomarchs, provincial governors, gained strength at the expense of the weak central governments, mirroring the first intermediate period. Both Tanis and Thebes failed to exert major influence over the entirety of Egypt. The 22nd dynasty was fundamentally Libyan, though it ruled under traditional Egyptian royal titles. Menkaure-Khayu replaced him, but little is known about his rule other than that he was the last monarch to construct a temple dedicated to the sun Djedkare-Isisi, whose origins are uncertain. He is not considered Menkaure-Khayu's son, though he may be related. Took the throne from the late 25th to the mid-24th century BCE. To stabilize the economy, he initiated extensive reforms in the administration and among the clergy. During his reign, Djedkare-Isisi refused the traditional practice of erecting a shrine to the sun deity and substantially reduced the number of clerics required to maintain funerary structures. He also organized the second major Punt expedition, which enriched Egypt and reinforced ties with the legendary land. The most profound development of Djedkare-Isisi's time, however, was the administrative decentralization of the government in Memphis, granting more authority to local officials. Djedkare-Isisi was succeeded by his son, Unas, whose reign is poorly documented. Unas was significant as the first Egyptian king to have the interior of his tomb decorated and inscribed with what became known as the pyramid texts. These inscriptions primarily depict the king in communion with Ra and Osiris. By the time the 6th dynasty began, the king's authority was already significantly reduced. Local officials and bureaucrats began constructing tombs more elaborate than those of the nobility during the reign of the first monarch, Teti. Teti himself was assassinated by his own bodyguards, according to the 3rd century BCE historian Manetho, an act that would have been unthinkable in the heyday of the 4th dynasty. He was replaced by Userkare, who may have been involved in the assassination plot. His reign was brief, and he was followed by Mer-Ir-Pepi I, during whose time the nomarchs, provincial governors, gained substantial authority. By the close of the Old Kingdom, political power had fractured, and the system became severely decentralized. Sheshonq I, 943 to 922 BCE, founded this dynasty after successfully reunifying Egypt and launching military campaigns reminiscent of the New Kingdom's imperial glory. Shashank I reformed the administrations of both Tanis and Thebes, ensuring that priestly offices were no longer hereditary but were appointed by the monarch, a policy extended to the selection of the influential god's wife of Ammonius. His military success revitalized the economy, briefly bringing Egypt close to the power of the New Kingdom era. Osorkon II ascended in 872 BCE and managed to maintain stability. Following his reign, however, Egypt again fractured into smaller, rival kingdoms, ruling from sites like Heracleopolis, Tanis, Sais, Memphis, Hermopolis in Lower Egypt, and Thebes in Upper Egypt. To the south, the Kushite ruler Kashta, c. 750 BCE, recognized Egypt's weakness and moved to capitalize on it. Kashta greatly admired Egyptian culture, having fully Egyptianized his capital city of Napata and much of his territory. He maintained strong trade links with Thebes and understood the processes of appointing high officials. Between 747 and 721 BCE, his son, Pi, solidified Nubian control over Upper Egypt. When the kings of Lower Egypt resisted, Pi marched a massive army north, conquering and subjugating all major towns before returning to Napata. Egypt was now legally under Kushite rule, though Pi permitted the defeated Lower Egyptian rulers to regroup and retain some nominal local power. While Egypt lost its traditional strength and buffer zones during the Third Intermediate Period, states like Judah and Israel still served to separate Egypt from major powers. Shashank I's earlier subjugation of these areas had inadvertently positioned Egypt directly against the burgeoning Assyrian Empire, eliminating any natural buffer. The slow restoration of central power would become a decades-long struggle, lasting well into the 12th dynasty. As central authority broke down, political control devolved entirely into the hands of the nomarchs. This pattern continued through the reigns of Merenre-Nemtium-Saf I and Neferkare-Pepi II, who ascended as a child and lived to a great age, marking an unprecedented rule of nearly a century. Throughout Pepi II's lengthy tenure, the Old Kingdom gradually crumbled. The increasing influence of both provincial nomarchs and the clergy eroded the authority of the central government and the king. Pepi II was succeeded by Merenre-Nemtium-Saf II, whose reign was very short, and the dynasty concluded with Necherkare. Some scholars identify Necherkare as Queen Nitocris, known from Herodotus's account of an Egyptian queen who avenged her brother's murder by drowning his assassins at a banquet. Pepi II had outlived all his designated heirs and appears to have been an increasingly ineffective monarch in his final years. When a severe drought caused famine, there was no strong central authority capable of responding effectively. The Old Kingdom officially ended with the Sixth Dynasty because no powerful successor could ascend the throne and guide the people. Local authorities prioritized their own regions, lacking the means or motivation to assist the rest of the nation. As the Sixth Dynasty faded, Egypt descended into the First Intermediate Period, FIP. The First Intermediate Period is primarily characterized by the ascendancy of provincial administrators over distinct regions and the corresponding decline in the power of the central government located at Memphis. Monumental construction on the scale of the Giza pyramids ceased because no singular, powerful sovereign existed to command and finance them, nor was there a coordinating administration to organize the necessary massive workforce. Moving into the 26th dynasty, Psamtik I was a formidable ruler who sought to revive Egypt's past glories, initiating a period known as the Sate Renaissance through vast restoration projects, architectural endeavors, and military successes. His son, Necho II, 610 to 595 BCE, maintained this legacy, launching further military campaigns, promoting construction, and expanding the armed forces. Recognizing the Egyptians' historical weakness at sea, Necho II successfully utilized a fleet composed of Greek mercenaries. Necho II is remembered as a capable military commander who significantly strengthened the nation he inherited. Later, during the long reign of Amasis II, the country enjoyed economic prosperity driven by reforms to government spending, stimulated commerce, and effective military campaigns. Egypt flourished under his decisive leadership, marked by secure borders, vibrant trade, and renewed construction of temples and art, thus recovering some of its lost international prestige. Amasis II was succeeded by his son, Psamtik III, 526 BCE, a young and inexperienced ruler who was wholly unprepared for the challenges ahead. The preceding confrontation with Persia had been brewing. Cambyses II, the Persian king, had requested one of Amasis' daughters as a wife. Amasis, seeking to avoid both compliance and outright conflict, as it was traditionally forbidden to send noble Egyptian women abroad as consorts, instead sent the daughter of his predecessor, Apries. Profoundly insulted by Amasis' deceit, the Egyptian princess revealed her true identity upon arriving at Cambyses II's court. Cambyses II immediately vowed revenge for Amasis' calculated insult, thus setting the stage for the invasion. Psamtik III was swiftly defeated, and Cambyses II conquered Egypt, establishing the 27th dynasty. Cambyses II was known for his harsh treatment of the new province. Historical data, however, suggests a different socio-political model rather than a chaotic dark age. The claim of civil unrest stems largely from the absence of a unified, powerful central government. The different regions of the country were essentially self-governing. The scarcity of information regarding the kings of the 7th and 8th dynasties attests to their political ineffectiveness, with their identities and dates eventually fading from Egyptian records. At some point, rulers who viewed themselves as the legitimate heirs of the Old Kingdom kings abandoned the ancient city of Memphis. The rulers of the 9th and 10th dynasties subsequently established their seat of power in Heracleopolis, declaring themselves the true monarchs of Egypt. Around 2125 BCE, an influential Theban nomarch named Intef I, who bore the customary titles of Great Overlord of the Nome and Overseer of Priests, rose to prominence in Thebes. He challenged the authority of the Heracleopolitan kings, established Egypt's 11th dynasty, and provided the momentum necessary for the country's reunification during the Middle Kingdom. Known as Intef the Mighty, a monument was erected in his honor at the Temple of Karnak. Although Mentuhotep II is often credited as the second Menes, meaning unifier or great force, who reunited Egypt and initiated the Middle Kingdom period, the groundwork for that unity was laid by Intef I. Mentuhotep I, circa 2115 BCE, followed Intef's strategy, conquering neighboring nomes for Thebes and significantly increasing the city's stature and strength. His predecessors carried on his initiatives. Mentuhotep II capitalized on these early victories to ultimately defeat Heracleopolis, subsequently rewarding the nomes loyal to Thebes while punishing those who had maintained allegiance to the old kings. After the process of unification, Mentuhotep II focused his time on governance, military achievements, and construction projects. Unlike his predecessor, Darius I, who ascended to the Achaemenid throne in 522 BCE, sought to govern Egypt effectively, even from afar. Though he toured Egypt at least twice, he maintained a distant preference for the country. Nonetheless, he respected Egyptian culture, allocating funds for the restoration of damaged temples and the dedication of new ones. Following the Persian policy of religious tolerance, Darius I honored the Egyptian gods with gifts and statues. He is widely considered to have treated Egypt far more gently than Cambyses II. During the Second Persian invasion of Greece in 480 BCE, Darius' son, Xerxes I 486 to 465 BCE, leveraged the entire Achaemenid Empire, including significant resources from Egypt. Following crushing defeats at Salamis, 480 BCE, and Plataea, 479 BCE, Xerxes largely retreated from foreign military ventures, focusing instead on internal construction projects and court life. His successor, Artaxerxes I 465 to 424 BCE, spent 6 years suppressing the first major Egyptian rebellion, led by Inaros II, the Libyan prince, son of Psamtik V, who was actively supported by Athens between 460 and 454 BCE. Although the Persians controlled Egypt through the 27th and 31st dynasties, Egyptian culture was consciously preserved. Furthermore, the native 30th dynasty briefly restored a semblance of Egyptian glory before the Second Persian invasion. This entire late period, 27th to 31st dynasties, was characterized by persistent Egyptian resistance to Persian authority. Yet, Egypt often prospered because Persian shahs generally respected and patronized the culture. Native rulers like Amartius of the 28th dynasty, and Nectanebo I and Nectanebo II of the 30th dynasty, all governed, commanded armies, and participated in building projects in the tradition of the great pharaohs. Ultimately, Egypt's period of independence before the Second Conquest was short-lived. Mentuhotep's successor, Mentuhotep III, reigning circa 2010 to 1998 BCE, maintained and expanded these programs. He dispatched an army to Punt and heavily fortified the northern delta borders. Mentuhotep IV replaced him. His entire 7-year rule is marked by silence in the records, yet he most likely continued his predecessor's effective policies, as the nation was thriving when Amenemhat succeeded him as monarch. Amenemhat I was Mentuhotep IV's vizier. While on a mission to quarry stones for the King's Project, Amenemhat commissioned an inscription detailing 2 extraordinary events he witnessed. First, a gazelle gave birth on the very stone selected for the king's sarcophagus lid, interpreted as a sign that the stone was correctly chosen and blessed with vitality and life. Second, an unexpected downpour unveiled a well large enough to water the entire company. This inscription was later interpreted to signify that the gods had chosen Amenemhat to be king, as they allowed him to experience these miracles. For reasons unknown, Amenemhat I abandoned Thebes and established his court and seat of power in Ichtoi, south of Memphis. His successor, Senusret I, circa 1971 to 1926 BCE, significantly improved the country's infrastructure and initiated the kind of grand building projects that symbolized royal power during the Old Kingdom, including a monumental temple to Ammonius at Karnak, which spurred the construction of that great temple complex. Amenemhat I, like Intef I and Mentuhotep II before him, restricted the authority of local nomarchs and priests, granting power only to his most trusted family members. Senusret I continued this highly effective strategy. The administration of the 12th dynasty was so efficient that, unlike the Old Kingdom, it maintained centralized wealth and control with the monarch while simultaneously fostering development and prosperity in individual regions without allowing them to become overly powerful. Philip II of Macedon, 359 to 336 BCE, unified the Greek city-states under Macedonian authority. When he was assassinated in 336 BCE, he was preparing a massive expedition aimed at conquering Persia. He bequeathed the means for this grand conquest to his son, Alexander III, the Great. The pharaohs of the 30th dynasty upheld the honor of Egyptian kingship, leaving behind impressive structures in the style of their great predecessors. Thus, while the late period fundamentally marked the end of native Egyptian political sovereignty, it certainly did not signify the end of Egyptian civilization. Even now, Egypt's cultural achievements command respect and remain some of the most popular and intriguing facets of the ancient world. Although 2 millennia have passed, 21st-century modern Egypt often feels like a continuation or a forward-looking version of the ancient land. The Nile River is still revered, and Egyptians continue to celebrate festivals rooted in antiquity, such as the spring festivities. Culinary traditions are heavily inspired by authentic ancient foods. The traditions endure, and Coptic, the final evolutionary form of the ancient Egyptian language, is still used in church liturgy and found integrated within the local Arabic dialect. Modern Egyptians clearly demonstrate pride in this legacy, seen vividly in recent events like the grand parades held in Cairo for transporting royal mummies to the Museum of Egyptian Civilization and the dazzling reopening of the Avenue of Sphinxes in Luxor. The nation is currently focused on rapid development, constructing new cities, and enhancing commerce through major infrastructure projects, including highways carved through mountains and deserts. They are also preparing to open the Grand Egyptian Museum, arguably the largest museum complex in the world. Excavations continue daily, yielding new discoveries that could, at any moment, rival the spectacular finding of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. The king governed all of Egypt, but specific officers were duly rewarded for their loyalty. The Egyptians developed sophisticated irrigation systems and advanced methods for tracking water levels, including nilometers built to measure the height of the annual flood and subsequently determine appropriate tax levels. Canals were dug to provide water to various areas. When Senusret I decided to transform the Fayum region, the Tam area, into a thriving agricultural center, He developed a specific irrigation system utilizing a dike that transported water from Lake Moeris, resulting in agricultural abundance there. He was also responsible for constructing the Whitechapel, a monument vital to historians as it records all the nomes of the period. Senusret I was followed by Amenemhat II, circa 1929 to 1895 BCE, who may have governed alongside him. The practice of co-regency, unique to the Middle Kingdom, involved a younger man, typically the monarch's chosen heir, often a son, governing jointly with the king to learn the duties and ensure a smooth transfer of power. Scholars still debate the universality of this practice, though there is no doubt it was employed by Amenemhat II and his successor, Senusret II, circa 1897 to 1878 BCE. This land will forever remain a captivating enigma, dazzling and enchanting people across the globe with its timeless magic and history.